So good afternoon. It is now 4:45 and I will be calling the meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education to order. Just a reminder that pursuant to the governor's executive order allowing for this meeting is happening remotely via Zoom. All board members, staff are participating remotely, and guests. And we're also, in addition to recording this meeting, we're streaming it on Facebook Live. Before we start with the meeting, I'd like everyone, please, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much. For today, the next item is public comment, and just as a reminder, for public comments at this meeting, people can sign up or send comments rather to info@lawrenceallianceforeducation.org. All of those letters are provided to LAE members and are also included as part of the public record and included in as far as the minutes are for each meeting. So just want to note that. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent for her report.
Great, thank you so much. Since we last met, we've been busy with the logistics of implementing our remote model and have met with principals on some of those logistics quite a bit that we have to do in terms of work. We've also drafted a survey that will be sent out to staff with respect to their intent to return. And we have then also been in conversations with folks who can give us their expertise as it pertains to ventilation in our buildings. So today with us, we have a CBI. They are part of the group that works with the city. We call them, Merlino calls them the house doctors. I'll let him jump in here to see if he has anything to add. But we've asked of them to help us better understand the health and ventilation issues that our buildings may face, in particular a timeline so that we can do some better planning around that. And also, what does that work look like? So I'll let Merlino jump in, and then I'll let CBI jump in.
Good afternoon, everybody. Superintendent mentioned, like said, there are on-call house doctors. They do many projects in our city via HVAC, elevators, many projects within the city buildings. So I was in touch with Mike Teller, who's a principal of CBI, and mentioned to him that many concerns throughout our meetings have come up via ventilation, air quality, etc. So he's more than willing to help us and look at our facilities. He could elaborate a little more on what he could do for us and take it from there. So I think I'll turn it over to Mike now.
Great, thanks, Chris. And thank you all for having us this afternoon. As Chris mentioned, CBI is an architectural and structural engineering design firm. We consult with municipalities, and our prime practice area is the repair and restoration of existing buildings. We've been working lately with the city for the last 2 years with a house doctor contract that's basically an open contract. The city can call us with any projects that they have, any problems that have to do with the buildings. But we have a long relationship with Lawrence, starting back in 2001 when we restored the clock tower on the City Hall, and in 2003 when we restored the Veterans Memorial Stadium next to the high school, including putting in the first synthetic turf. And with me today is Ken Beck, who you've met already on the Zoom. Ken is a principal of ELW Engineers, and I'll let him introduce himself and talk about his qualifications in a second. But we are already working together with the City of Lawrence and the school department on several projects, including Arlington and South Chillers, the roofing at Hennessy. We're working on the Ames Street Fire Station, the City Hall elevators, and as I mentioned, Museum Square. We're working about 30 different projects at different stages of design and construction. Our goal here is problem solving and project management. We have a tremendous amount of experience with schools. We know schools is a unique building type with teachers, staff, children, parents, guests who all attend, and we're intimately aware of the environmental controls that are necessary to bring everyone back. I think as we do these projects, just to give you an idea of how we work, and I've been working in Boston for 42 years as an architect. I'm a principal of the firm. Every one of our projects starts with understanding the client's goals. What do you want to achieve? These projects aren't about us. This is about what you want to achieve and where you want to go. What information do you need? In the case of this sort of study, you're interested in knowing what you have and what are the options for repair, replacement, renovation, okay? Every option that we give you comes with costs because nobody wants to know the solution if they don't know how much it costs. And ultimately, that's where we're going with this, and it has to do with funding. So in order to do this, we have to understand what you want to do, what are the problems, what are the options, and what are the costs, and that comes through in our ultimate report. I think one of the things that you should know is one of our strengths is being able to explain technical things to non-technical people. So please feel free to jump in if we get too nerdy in terms of terminology, too much in the weeds. But in general, we're able to really look at the problems that you have and tell you why they are and what are the benefits of the various options that we give you. Sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's functionality, sometimes it's maintenance, sometimes it's long life. All those things go into the mix in terms of giving you the information to understand the systems and make decisions, because that's the ultimate goal. Ken, could you jump in and talk about your firm and your experience doing school renovations? And then could you jump into how you would approach this project? What's your process?
Sure thing. My name is Ken Beck. I'm with PLW Engineers. I'm a principal. We are a 50-person engineering firm with one of our areas of expertise in HVAC. We've been in business since 1999. We've worked with Michael for much of that time, so we're very familiar with each other. So we've been helping a lot of the school systems with these types of evaluations for their schools. There's 3 or 4 different standards out there that have been released for the reopening of schools. One is ASHRAE. The state has also issued a standard, and also the Mass Teachers Association has some guidelines they're looking to be implemented into the return to school. We're using those standards to come up with plans on how we can best accommodate them. So what we would do and what we are doing in these cases are visiting the schools, walking through them, inspecting the systems that are there, and confirming their capacities and capabilities with the original design drawing. We then prepare a report that has those existing conditions, what they're capable of, and what they were designed for, and then we also include what the proposed occupancy of the school is going to be. So a lot of the schools are going to the hybrid model, which is, Monday, Tuesday is 50% of the students, Thursday, Friday is 50% of the students, which really helps in a lot of the cases in terms of the things that we're concerned with. The primary areas of concern we are really looking at is ventilation, exhaust, better filtration, how we're managing the systems that are in place, and what we can do to increase the capacities and or supplement those systems for these standards that we're trying to comply with. So we gather all that information, we put it together, and we evaluate it. We have existing conditions, what the guidelines that we're looking at are, and then we have recommendations that are mostly in a tiered approach. Mostly the guidelines recognize that we're trying to do a lot of things in a short period of time. So we are trying to give you a tiered approach on what you can do immediately with the systems that you have to make them better. And then what could you do beyond that to even get them closer to the recommendations we have. So there are a lot of steps involved in different levels of what we can do. The intent of all these guidelines, and I think all the school systems, is to make what you have work better and how we can supplement it to make the schools safer. There's no magic system or approach that's going to be immediate. So we try to give you that opportunity to phase into it and make it more a safer place for everybody in the school system.
So, Ken, in terms of timeline, for us, and so everybody understands this, I'll run through the steps. We will prepare a proposal for the city, which will outline the scope of our work and the timeline and the costs. Once that's accepted, we wait for we need a contract or a purchase order. Then Ken reviews, we all review the documents. We go to the site. We don't do this, it's not a drive-by. We actually have to look at the equipment. We have to look at the systems and understand their condition. Some of them are brand new. Some of them are very old. Some of them are in poor condition. Some of them are in moderate condition. All of that feeds into the analysis. Ken looks at the mechanical, meaning the air conditioning. So HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So he looks at the HVAC systems. His electrical engineers look at the electrical systems that are associated with the equipment. That's important because if you're going to replace a unit, you have to make sure you have enough electricity to the building, and whether or not you have enough circuit breakers, etc. Whether or not there's the infrastructure associated with it is sufficient to support the new units, the new ventilation, etc. At the same time, if Ken's going to put a brand new unit on the roof, my firm needs to look and make sure that structurally it can support the unit, as well as once it comes inside, do we need to remove ceilings? Do we need to add ceilings, soffits, finishes? Do we have to cut through walls on the interior? What are the physical changes associated with it? This is never as simple as just buying a piece of equipment. And that's important, especially in the public realm. When we prepare plans and specs, we have to have all the pieces and parts there to try to eliminate change orders down the way and to capture all the costs that are associated with these tasks. We interview maintenance staff. We interview Chris's staff. That's important because they understand how these systems work, how often they break down, and what's been the history of success in the building in terms of HVAC. We put together, after all this, we put together a draft report. We send that draft report to our cost estimator with all the plans that are available. And they look at the plans, they look at the report. We come up with cost estimate for all the various options that we've offered. And then once we have that, we issue that as a draft report. We have a meeting with Chris or your committee. We talk about the options. If we then want to revise the report, we go back, we update it. That can happen many times, depending on where we want to go with this. So while Ken, would you say that your on-site investigation is a 6 to 8 week process, 8 to 12 weeks to do all the schools?
For all the schools, I would say it's probably 6 to 8 weeks of process.
Okay, that's to do, is that to do the 7 big ones, or is that to do all 21?
All 21.
Okay, so if we were going to do the 7 big ones, and as a, say, phase 1, Chris, I think you and I talked about that real quick. If you were going to do that, what's your timing on that, do you think?
I would hope to get it done within 3 to 4 weeks.
3 to 4 weeks. Okay, so that's that on-site time. That doesn't include the proposal, the paperwork, the cost estimating, and then the meetings after. So that gives you kind of an idea of the timeline.
Right, and I just want to mention that, you know, these reports are very specific to the school. It's not a generic report that applies to all the schools. We look at the school each school independently and make our recommendations based on the actual systems that are in those schools. So it's an independent report for each school that's specific to that school.
So for example, in the new high school, you have equipment that's 15 years old that may need to be repaired. It may actually need to be replaced at this point. There may be components that need to be replaced, but that's also a full system. That's equipment, that's ductwork, that's thermostats, it's controls, it's valves, it's everything. Where if you go to the Breen School, for example, which would be one of the smaller, older schools, which is it may be phase 2, they have a steam system. Okay, so one of the options there is for Ken to say, you might want to replace this at the same time as we're adding ventilation, and just go with a completely new system. You could say, the steam's good, it's a new unit, we need to update this or that, but add ventilation. So as he said, it's a customized report, it's customized solutions for each building, which is what you want. You want that thoughtful approach rather than a one-size-fits-all, because as Ken said, it isn't a one-size-fits-all. Questions?
Great. Just before we open up to questions, Superintendent, Chris, anything else you all want to add? And then I'll go through the LAE members for questions.
Yeah, I appreciate you making the distinction between all of the schools and then, you know, just a subset of those schools in terms of your timeline. And I also appreciate your detail that these are not like a cut and paste, that you don't have like a template and then you just check boxes, that every building would get a very specific report based on the systems. I appreciate that.
Correct. That gives you the data the real data to make decisions, and that you can rely on. Thank you.
Great. So at this point, I'm just, you know, I think there are 3 of us still LAE members. So Noemi, I'll start with you, and then Pat.
Mine is more of an overall question, because it seems that it's going to take a lot of work in order to ensure that the ventilation and some of the backup system are in place. Do we know how much it's going to cost us to do some of that work?
Are you asking about our work as the consultants or the work as the construction?
The work as the construction. Do you have any idea how?
Well, I think it really depends on what level we're going to go to and what the capabilities of your system are now. So there are certain guidelines that have been published, and can we meet those guidelines depending on how your school is going to be occupied? Are you going to go to a hybrid model? So if you're a newer school and you were designed on the current code, you're at 10 CFM per person, and you're going to the hybrid model that has 50% occupancy, you're now over 20 CFM per person, which is what a lot of the guidelines are recommending, and is part of the Mass Teachers Association guidelines as well. So I think we just need to look at the whole thing, what you have, what it can do, what your occupancy is going to be, and how can we get to where we want to go, and what that entails.
I'm sorry, Ken, can you just repeat what you said with regards to the guidelines? Again, you give the example if you have like 50% of your kids, and can you just say
Yes.
that again, please?
So Ken,
So
CFM is cubic feet per minute of air being blown into the space, correct?
yes, that's what it is.
Okay, thank you.
So current codes for classrooms require 10 CFM per occupant of classroom plus 0.06 CFM per square foot.
Mhm.
So right now, if your classrooms are meeting code, which I would imagine most of them are, if you go to that 50% hybrid model, you're gonna be taking half the occupants out of the space, which means you're doubling the amount of ventilation you have per person. So you're going to do over that 20 CFM per person that the Mass Teachers Association is recommended in their guidelines. So, and on top of that, there's a possibility that the system you have there now has some extra capacity in it as well that we can bump into and even increase it further. So it's going to really be a due diligence approach and seeing what your classroom is, what the system is, what its capacity is, what its capabilities might be, and how we can further those capabilities within what you have to get you where we want you to be in these times.
Mm-hmm. And at some point during the presentation, somebody mentioned something along the lines of backup generator. Did I hear that? Or is that a, did I
Backup.
imagine that?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
you know, like is one of the system breaks down, or do we have a power surge? Like how do
So
we in those cases of emergency? Like
yeah, so it's possible that a lot of your schools have emergency generators. We just don't know that yet. So if they do, that's helpful as well. And some of the school systems that are going back to school in the fall,
mm-hmm.
they actually have the luxury right now that they don't need heat, so they can run their systems at 100% outside air right now until they are able to implement something. So,
Okay.
we'll work with you to see how you're going to get back into your planning to get back to your classrooms and figure out strategies to best utilize what we can.
So Naomi, I think you asked the question, how much is this going to cost construction-wise? And unfortunately, right now, there's no way to predict that. I think, as Ken was saying, however, there are potentially some schools that need very little additional ventilation, because if you meet the code, you're actually exceeding it by reducing the number of people. But I think part of it is too, what is the condition of those systems? Are they working properly? That's where you might be getting into costs to bring them up to speed from a maintenance standpoint. So there's the design and capacity side, and then there's the condition side.
And when you guys are evaluating and assessing the buildings, and sometimes you can have a building where the ventilation is good, but you have pockets of areas where ventilation is not appropriate. And I have seen, like I work at the college, and I have seen that in some office spaces, in the bathroom, in certain corners. And I'm actually more concerned about the bathroom because that's when kids congregate. When you guys are doing these evaluations, are you also looking at the cafeteria, the bathroom, the gym, and all those places?
Yeah, no, we're looking at the whole building. So so a lot of the schools aren't using those spaces like they normally do anyway. The library, the multi-purpose areas, the auditorium, they're not actually being used for those functions. A lot of times, a lot of them are being used as extra classroom spaces, and they're spreading out into those spaces. Typically, those spaces have a lot more ventilation because they have high occupant loads anyway. So we're able to document on how they can be used and what the maximum use capacity should be. And to your point, that there's a lot of so-called storage closets that have been converted into offices over the years and stuff like that have nothing in them. We're recommending that those spaces be closed off and no one's in there, and they be relocated to places that they do have adequate ventilation or at least a operable window.
So that's part of the study?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and the bathrooms too?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Great. Pat?
I'm sorry. I just have a question. In your presentation, you talked about a subset of buildings that would take 7 buildings. It would take 3 to 4 weeks to do an assessment. My question is, that's going to impact the opening of schools and whatever we do as far as students and teachers coming back. Is there any way that could happen more, quicker to give us a better read on those buildings so that we can make a decision?
Have you not decided what you're doing for the fall yet?
I'm sorry.
You haven't decided what you're doing for the fall, for September with the kids yet?
I believe we're doing a remote model with the intent that some of the high needs students are coming back into the building. Am I correct, Superintendent?
That's correct.
So the buildings are going to be very low occupied, right? So I mean, we can certainly look at specific areas quicker that you might need answers to, that you are anticipating using. So if we have an idea where you might be occupying, what those needs might be, we can actually probably get in there faster and give you responses to those areas before you need to occupy them.
Okay. All right, I'll hold off for now, Ventura. You can go.
Great. Great. Thank you. I do have questions. And again, I'm going to take you up on your offer of explaining very technical terms to lay people. So we'll test it here for you,
All right.
for me. So I guess one of the things I'm learning on this meeting, and I just want to confirm with you, is that, as I understand, first of all, like I should say at the front of this, like we're having this conversation today because, like all other communities in Massachusetts, we're grappling with, this really difficult decision on how to make sure that we keep our staff, our students, everyone safe, and try to ensure that we're providing access to in-person education in addition to the remote learning, but access to in-person education, particularly for students who we have a pretty strong indication that, doing so will just help them tremendously. So we're grappling, as every community is, with these decisions and, trying to make sure that we're leading cautiously, keeping health at the front and center of everything we do. My understanding is that, even though, we don't understand everything about this disease, that, the guidance that's coming from CDC, from our own state, has a variety of mitigation strategies. They include wearing masks, and that's, I think, been proven to have, be very important. The 6 feet, separation as well. And again, just social distancing in general, hand washing with water and soap. And so there are, a variety of mitigation strategies. And one that keeps coming up as well, and which is why we're talking today, is this notion of just airflow and ventilation. And my understanding is that the goal here is to really, ensure a certain level of airflow and air dilution and, filtration, things like that. So getting into the weeds though, one thing I'm learning on this call is that in order for a building to be up to code, it has to have a certain level of ventilation. And I think you used the acronym CFM, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So can you explain again, and again, for my benefit and for the benefit of everyone watching on Facebook Live, if you could just explain again, what we mean by CFM, what it's required to be up to code specifically. And again, I guess what I'm trying to get at is if our buildings are up to code, it seems like they're meeting, the requirements for CFM to be up to code, but are those also in line with what you're seeing as guidance for these moments of COVID?
Right. So current code requires 10 cubic feet of outside air per minute per person in an occupied classroom. So a classroom is usually designed for 25 to 30 people. So that's, as a design engineer, when I go to design a system, that's what I'm designing the system for. And so your newer schools, I'm sure, are going to be at least that level. And so you should have proper outside air capabilities in each one of your classrooms based on those code requirements. And so as we had noted before, if we're talking about reducing the occupancy of the classroom based on social distancing and whatnot, most of the classrooms that we've been dealing with are getting into the 15 people range, which means you're going to have in excess of 20 cubic feet of outside air per person, sometimes even 25 for each occupant in those classrooms. The guidelines, all the guidelines that have been posted, the ASHRAE, the state, the Mass Teachers Association, the goal is to maximize outside air as much as possible and reduce recirculation as much as possible. And then when you have recirculation, do the best job at filtering that you can. A lot of the newer equipment has the higher level of filters, filtration capacities. They call it a MERV rating. It's MERV. So all the guidelines are saying, if you're recirculating air, try to use at least a MERV 13, and if you can use a 14, use a MERV 14. If you can't do that, provide portable Hepa filters for filtration in those spaces. So, filtration is a big one for recirculated areas. Outside air as much as possible. Outside air as much as possible. Whatever we can get in through the existing system is what we're gonna do. Even if your system's sized for current code levels, if we find the capacity of the units have the capacity to run more, we're gonna try to run more through it. There's going to be a balance there in terms of occupant comfort, obviously, during the winter. The outside air temperature, your space temperature, and how much outside air you can put into the space. In the fall here, if you were actually in school, you could run those units with 100% outside air because you don't have to worry about heating that air. So you could run more outside as much as you wanted at that point. So we're going to look at all those things and how each one of those aspects plays into your occupied classroom. In addition, there are other things they want you to do as well. If you're not running 24/7, they want you to at least run the systems 2 hours before and after occupancy. They want the exhaust systems to run 24/7. So all your exhaust fans in your building should be on all the time. So we're gonna be looking at your existing system. What can we do with it? How can we supplement it? Can we add filtration to it? Can we add outside air to it? How can we better control it? Can we can we change how it's controlled now to provide more outside air, run longer, post-purge, pre-purge? And then also, what can we do to supplement it? Do we want to open up windows and provide supplemental heater, electric heaters if we have to? So we're gonna go through all those scenarios and give you options on what you can do with your existing system, how you can supplement it, and how we get to where we want to be.
Great, I really appreciate that. And again, I'm sorry, did you want to add something? You're on mute.
I was going to ask Ken to just elaborate. The building code establishes a certain level of performance, but you also mentioned ASHRAE and the state teachers' recommendations. Are those more stringent than the building code? Because Massachusetts is pretty progressive in terms of our level of building code requirements.
Well, I think the guidelines that are coming out are intentionally more stringent, just to try to get as much get us as far as we can with the ventilation and filtration that we can. And all the guidelines actually recognize that they're asking a lot of these school systems to do some things that would seem almost impossible in a very short amount of time. So they give you alternatives for things to do in the interim if you cannot get it done in a short period of time. They go through all these guidelines. There's like the Mass Teachers Association one specifically. They have probably 10 or 11 bullet points that they put out in terms of what they would like to see in terms of the systems. But each one actually says, if you can't do this, do this. And then there's a line item almost near the end saying that they understand that, if you cannot bring older systems up to to these levels or these controls or these parameters, provide portable Hepa filters in the classrooms in the interim until such time you can get it upgraded. So I think the idea is we want to what is the maximum we can do with the systems that we have, recognizing that every system is completely different. I imagine you have 21 schools, and you probably have some that are very similar, but they probably operate completely different than each other. So we need to look at each one of them and see how we can best model them for complying with the standards and what we need to do to supplement each one of those. And each one's going to be completely different from the other.
Great, thank you. And again, just a little texture on what this board voted on last week is that we voted to start mostly remote, for everyone in the district, with the exception of up to about 20% of our students, which, roughly, let's call it 1,300, 1,400, who have the option of some in-person. And we expect that, some of those families will choose to have their students learn remotely as well. So I think just for a ballpark figure, we're saying about, let's say up to, 1,300 students. So that's sort of from a student perspective. And then the other part of the current proposal is that teachers would be required to teach in person in their classroom. So just, the one teacher in the room. So, so again, that's just the current proposal and what sort of this vote voted on. So
yeah, so I think that gives you some time in terms of what, your normal system operation should give you more than adequate ventilation and for those that partial occupied building. In a classroom, in a single classroom, a typical classroom with one person in it, you still be getting normal operation 375 cubic feet per minute of outside air for that one teacher, and any recirculated air is only recirculated in that one room, so it would only be that person. So I think that gives you some time to for us to do our job and for you to implement some strategies for when you more occupy the building.
great. And again, some of the things I'm taking from this meeting are, there's building code, which obviously I should know, but and that includes the CFM, which I didn't know, and that it sounds like given our current plan, even with, up to 20% of students and obviously spread out over different facilities, because our buildings are up to code, from a ventilation standpoint, from a CFM standpoint, we should be sort of, well above meeting the requirements that are coming out in any of the guidance documents that you all are using when you're making decisions, again, from a ventilation standpoint.
Right.
Okay. How about from, because you talked a lot about, or you also talked about filtration and obviously understanding the filters we do have in place, and there may be some temporary or portable filters in place. Is filtration also typically a part of building code inspections?
It is, but it's not. So typical filters right now are MER-based. So that is more particulate and not virus. airborne particulate. So for this particular exercise, and the recommendations are MERV 13 or better.
Yep.
And that's only for recirculating systems. So if you have systems that aren't providing recirculated air, you don't need that level of if you have an energy recovery unit system that's just providing ventilation air to the classrooms, you don't need to have that level of filtration. But
I'm sorry, can I pause you there for 1 second? Because I just want to make sure I understand that point. So many of our buildings do not have air conditioning, or, I think, if I understand correctly, and Chris, correct me, that many of our buildings, it's sort of open windows, right? Like, we don't have a proper HVAC system. So in those cases where it's, we're not recirculating air, as far as because we have the open windows, you're saying in those cases, that MERV 13 or whatever, wouldn't apply, right? Because we don't have.
Yeah, so you wouldn't be recirculating air at that point. I'd have to see what you have in terms of exhaust systems,
Yep.
things like that. But you do want to have some air movement too. So if there's a possibility of a portable HEPA type filtration system in each classroom, that would be something that would be helpful. Just from the perspective of people moving about in a classroom, breathing in and out, it just have that level of filtration would be helpful, as well as any ventilation we could bring in through an operable window system.
And there are portable units or temporary units that would meet those requirements?
Yes, I think the recommendation is 100 CFM per 250 square feet of space. So they're not very big units, and most of them are off-the-shelf type HEPA type filtration units.
Okay, so with our buildings being up to code and potentially some portable units, sorry, I see a finger up there like you want to add something before I.
Well, I want to be clear. Ken did not say all your buildings are up to code. What he said was some of your buildings are newer, and when they were built to a code. And the code in the last 20 years has been relatively the same. It gets more and more efficient as you go. 7 of your 21 schools are larger and newer. Yep. And have full HVAC systems. Of the remaining 14, which are older and smaller, you cannot say those are up to code. Those do not have ventilation systems. So I just want to be clear that we're on the same page here, and there's not an expectation that everything's up to code. The last thing I want to say on that is a lot of the things that Ken is recommending, is recommended by the state and for upgrades, might lead to additional energy costs. Certainly if you're putting a bunch of portable units in, right, you have more electric unit use. If you're bringing in more outside air, sometimes you have to heat it. That might result in more energy costs. Is that correct, Ken?
Yeah, so in each report, I do note that. I note that, there is going to be an impact to your energy and maintenance costs for the buildings. You're going to have to change filters more often. You're going to have to, deal with more things, disinfection, cleaning, all that type of stuff. So I think, there is going to be an ongoing cost that is going to be realized as part of whatever implementation you choose.
Great. And I just want to state for the record, so we have Mayor Rivera who's joined us. So we do have quorum now. So just want to state that for the record. Okay. This is really helpful. I, like Pat, I think, and the superintendent also said, we'll want to work with the district to identify maybe the buildings that we're prioritizing. And it could be, those 7 that, are newer, but there may be others. So I don't want to, obviously we'll work with the district to determine that. And again, my own edification here, and I appreciate the clarity about some having HVACs and not. So let's pretend, or let's take a school that does not have, that was not built with like a because they're older, like the full HVAC system. But those schools can still achieve the level of sort of CFM and air filtration that is being recommended. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you can get there. And in fact, some of the older schools, some of the old steam unit ventilator schools, when they were built, they really didn't care about energy, so they kind of overventilated them anyways. Over the years, that might have been changed by, the original design might have been dialed back or changed, but, they may have the capability to do more than they're doing now. So, we'll look into that, see what they're doing, what they're capable of doing. But every school has a path to getting to where the guidelines want you to go. So there is a path for every school, whether it's, something that we can implement with, or something we have to supplement, but there is a path to getting them to compliance with the guidelines.
Great, and yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the full report, and I think for me, if I had to list what the priorities are, I think one is, I mean, we do need to have some level of comfort in that every classroom can safely, from these, sort of metrics and guidance, can accommodate at least 1 to 2 teachers, because again, currently the consideration is that teachers would teach in their classroom, but so that's one. And then related to that, though, or I'd say the second priority is if we're bringing kids back in smaller groupings, and that we would, again, those specific rooms and spaces where the staff and the kids are going to be, like, are completely meeting the guidance that is being issued. And so again, I'll leave it to the superintendent and her team as they're planning, like, what are those specific spaces and which are the ones we have to prioritize for review. But again, I just want to make it abundantly clear that, I'm concerned, and not concerned, my questions, and I just want to make sure that I'm very, confident in what we're getting is going to be for both that individual teacher that's in his or her room, like, that really matters to me, and for, the kids, even though they're, much smaller numbers that'll be coming back. So again, the superintendent, Chris, will work with you all to identify the buildings that we're thinking about to make sure that those are, spaces that are being reviewed quickly.
Yeah, and there's things we can talk about immediately about doing in terms of, even before the reports are, done, that you can do to make sure that you're maximizing the ventilation in those spaces as well, without the full report. Just simple things that, that would be in the report, but that you should do as part of, having people back in the school. Great,
thank you. Okay, I'll pause there. Mayor, I know you joined recently, so I'm not sure how much you've had a chance to hear. We just did a round of questions from other board members, so I'm not sure if at this time you have any questions.
Sure, I think my question is a simple one. I don't know if it was already covered, and I apologize for being late. In a situation, all these mitigations put in place, these are supposed to be additive to the other mitigations like masks and distancing, correct?
Yeah, correct. It's basically
and cleaning.
Yeah, this is evaluating your HVAC systems, and finding out what the capabilities of them are and how we can implement how they're operating, change how they're operating, or supplement how they're operating to get them in conformance with these guidelines that have been put out there by various agencies.
And and I know, again, we have so much footprint, and who knows the total. I'm not sure. I know it was said before. We're not really sure how many students are actually gonna be in class, and because of the social distancing, that number is gonna be less regardless. And so, in the end, even some classrooms that would just rely on an open window for ventilation, I'm not sure that we're gonna need to be there. But in an open window situation with distancing and masks, and not something that's using the air over, some of those the HVAC systems that recirculate air. Would that be a situation with no other mitigation except the window open, or one or two windows open? And I'm not talking fully open, just enough to get some air in. Is that something that might meet the baseline standard?
I'd really have to look at what you have, because there's always some level of ventilation, whether it's exhaust or some type of intake there. I mean, I think the intent is that most of these schools are gonna, if there are significantly decreased in population, that there's not going to be issues there. And like I mentioned before, I think we could have meet and talk about some of these areas before the before you occupied school, to see what we could do to make sure that they comply, or you put people in various other areas that may be better suited.
Right. And so another question is about HEPA filters.
Yes.
In a situation where you might not have any, and a window doesn't work, is it recommended to use a HEPA filter to be the only thing in the room filtering the air?
If you don't have a mechanical ventilation system or an operable window, we're recommending you don't put anybody in those spaces.
And the HEPA filters are for specific uses. It's not a cure-all, right?
Yeah. So HEPA filters, they recommend HEPA filtration for areas that have ventilation, but also have a part of the heating system has recirculated air, but can't accommodate the MERV 13 level filtration. Just to explain that, there's different levels of filtration, and the higher you go, the better the filter. Current code is MERV 8 for a lot of these spaces, and so. And a lot of your older equipment will not have the capacity to take on a better filter, because it's going to cause more restriction in the airflow, and the motors won't turn properly.
Right. They're not strong enough to push air through a tighter filter.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And so there might be a situation where the mitigating, because of the HVAC system in the school, or lack of one, and the availability of a window, that is, once we made the envelope tight, which means we fixed windows and doors, and we reduced the total number of people in the room, and everybody's wearing a mask, that they're really, as long as the window's open, that might be enough to deal with. And again, I know you have to go room by room, but what I don't want people is to show up and say, I thought you were going to do something to my room, and then there's nothing there. And then they're like, well, what happened? And you just want to say, well, there was enough with the window open, I even heard that you're not even supposed to use a fan in the window, because you want to lower the circulation of the air, not increase the circulation of the air. But again, I worry that we don't put a fan in the window, we open it up a crack, and then somebody walks in and said, you guys haven't done anything to this room.
No, I understand, and I think that's why we want to do these evaluations and make sure that you're doing your best, you're doing your level best to comply with these the path of getting you to where these guidelines are pushing us.
Yeah, and I guess, again, I had a staff person on early, so I'll go back and look at the notes. And if I can have the PowerPoint presentation, if there was one, sent over. The last thing I'll say is, I think when we were talking about going hybrid, there was a lot of conversation about having the opportunity for kids who wanted, and their parents who wanted to go remote. And now that we're talking about, because of the DESI standard, and I haven't seen today, but I'm pretty sure today we're going to continue to be in red. Which means we have to do a remote model with the expectations for students with needs. That we have to have a model that has the option for parents who need a place for their students to do in-person learning. And so we have received a lot of emails and calls about, about the safety of all of this. And I think that, again, because we're talking about a certain number of folks, and we're going to do all the other mitigations, not just ventilation, not just mask wearing, not just reducing the class size, not just social distancing, not just a schedule that we've really top to bottom on this, that there is a level of this that we have to have a service for those kids and those parents who need to have some in-person thing. And I want to just say that because it can feel like inundating that we're getting all this communications about they want everybody to go remote. And I still stand by the fact, I think that there are some students that need to be face-to-face. And I think that we're going to do all the things we can do to make it safe for everybody, and continue to learn how to do that. And so I want to make sure that we know, and just so you know, I know that you look at the people who are talking to us and they look like blue-collar folks, but every Zoom that I've seen, and they're not like wearing doctors' uniforms, and they're not, like Poindexter types. Every Zoom I've seen, I just saw one from Yale. The guy who was talking about the building looked like the guys who were talking to us about the building. These are what experts look like in this field. And so I want people like, oh, he's talking to these people, and they may not have the same qualifications. I'm just telling you that this is who talks about clean and safe buildings, and we're doing all we can to make that the case. And I still stand firmly behind the 20%, and we should push forward again. And Chris Bernino could tell you, and the superintendent could tell you, O'Donis can tell you that I told my staff across the city, if the schools need something to make it safer for the students who have to go to school and their families, and the teachers who have to teach in those classrooms, you drop everything and you help the schools. So we're going to put all hands on deck for it, and I just wanted to repeat that live because this is the task of the day, and we're going to make sure that people are safe when they do enter these buildings. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, I appreciate all the comments from LAE members, the questions, and I will maybe just say at this time for this topic, and again, there's no vote, but I think it's just been very important to get this information. I'll go one more time real quick, first with Noemi, then Pat, and see if there are any additional questions or comments.
I don't have any additional questions. I just want to make sure that, like the mayor said, that we are considering all the different aspects to make sure that everybody's safe. Understanding that, in some instances, we do need having more engagement with the kids.
Thank you. Pat?
Yes, I agree with Noemi. And before I do that, I want to thank you, Ventura, for the clarifying questions that you asked. It helped me out because I was thinking about units for the classrooms too. And by asking that question, I got my answers. So thank you for doing that. And again, we need to do everything that we can possibly do to make sure the kids and the teachers are safe. And there's no worry for them to come back and work in our buildings. So let's move forward.
Great, thank you. And I think the only thing I would say is just building on all these comments, and again, appreciate the the ventilation HVAC 101 for us lay people, but I'm cautiously optimistic just given the guidance that I've read, and then the guidance that I'm hearing today about again, things like airflow, filtration, things like that, that there are solutions that, along with, as the mayor said, the other mitigation strategies, that there are solutions to either our buildings already meeting some of those guidelines, or if not, to increase things like the airflow and the filtration, in order to make it meet all the guidelines that are coming out for COVID. So I guess that, I entered this conversation maybe thinking that, we're starting from square zero, but I actually, from what I'm hearing, and again, just the fact that code requires certain level of things like, you know, I know to the point that maybe not every building's there, but like I'm leaving here thinking that, again, an assessment will be important to make sure that we have that information and that data, but I'm leaving here feeling like there are, you know, mitigation strategies specifically around facilities that, you know, will help us ensure that our staff and students are entering places that, you know, are following all the guidelines that are coming out, and that we as a district are very stringent on the other mitigation strategies the mayor said, the hand washing, the masks, the social distancing, the cleaning. So I found this just very, very informative and helpful. So thank you all. Mayor, I'll come to you.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is that in the help to make it all better, that money has never been an issue. And so if we have to spend money on some of the mitigation efforts, we're going to do that. We have CARES Act money. We have some reserves. We will, you know, I know in the last meeting, the chair, you know, I'm sure he meant because we don't have time to deal with it that way, but we don't have HVAC systems in every single one of the buildings. That is a restriction of money and time. But if we need to spend money to get it to a safe place, we will spend money to make it a safe place. Again, it won't be hospital level ventilation, and I've talked to some of the Harvard professors and some of the COVID spread specialists, and you know they all said, you know, it's not necessary to be a hospital level one ventilation system to be safe. And so we will spend the money. I want to make sure money is not an issue in this effort, and I want to be on the record for that.
Great, thank you, Mayor. All right, so I think Chris referred to you all as the building doctors. So thank you all. Just really appreciate your time. Before we let him go, Cynthia, Chris, anything else you all want to add?
Add my appreciation for their time and their ability to help us better understand what the process is, the timeline, and of course we'll work with them and Chris Merlino and our city officials to be able to enter in a contract and be able to get this work started as quickly as possible, with the understanding that they just gave us that at the very earliest this would be 3 to 4 weeks, and that would be for a separate of our buildings. And for the entire system, then we would carry on, and that would take a longer period. That was my understanding. So I'm trying to summarize that for myself and others.
Let me be clear. The work that Ken has to do on site would be the 3 to 4 weeks, but the paperwork at the beginning, the meetings, the cost estimating, that might end up doubling the time before you have a final report.
Thank you. That's incredibly helpful to our planning in order to execute the remote model with the 20% of the high needs. That's really important timeline. So if we add the 3 to 4, we add another 2 weeks. We're still about 6 weeks away from being able to get the process completed plus reports. And that's a sub-separate of our schools. Am I clear on that?
Correct.
Thank you.
I have a question for the superintendent. Mr. Chair, is that okay?
Yeah, please.
So does that is, you know, we have a start date that we all voted on a calendar. Is that something that you could start do the start dates in remote and so that we can get ourselves some space, or is that something that you probably already thought of? Just wondering, or do you feel like the first date has to be for those people who are going to be in face to face, or do you have some flexibility?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Of course, we've been given this a lot of thinking with the understanding or the anticipation that this work will take some time. And so we would have a recommendation with respect to the actual start time for our students in high needs, given this timeline. And we're happy to bring that back to you all for your consideration and approval. And in the interim, we will absolutely start as scheduled with our students remote on the 16th.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate your time, and just look forward to getting regular updates from the superintendent, Chris, on the work. So the only other item under the superintendent's report was, Mayor, if you wanted to give any update just from the city side. I don't think the DPH latest weekly COVID is out. I keep checking for that. But I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to just provide updates on from the city side.
It is not, but I do want to announce, and we made notice to the press, and we pressed it on the community, that we implemented a couple of strategies to deal with being in the red. And one of them is making sure that anyone who has traveled outside the safe zone, feels very scientific to say it, science fiction to say it that way. When they come back, that they have to quarantine, we're going to do outreach to those people, make sure they do that, and that they fill out the documentation for the state. That's one of them. The second thing is that because of our study of 100 of the most recent people with the infection of COVID, the three top things were people who were at large parties and gatherings, people who had traveled outside the safe zone, and people who live in homes with people who have traveled outside the safe zone or been in large parties. And so we're tackling every large party. Noise complaint that we get is going to be treated as a spreader event. And so we're going to do not only $300 fines for the for noise complaints, we're going to do $300 fines as well for if we find people there not wearing masks. And hopefully we get some help from the state police, and we can maybe implement the issue of those large gatherings as problems with spacing, if there's less, if they're not doing a 6 feet distancing and things of that nature. And then the last thing we're doing, again, just to make sure that we're not spreading further and to mitigate the red status, is rolling back the restaurant hours to 10 o'clock. We have a feeling that, and it bears out, people who are in the restaurants, and some of our bars have turned into restaurants to help them survive. And after 10 o'clock, it's really less eating and more drinking. And there's a correlation between drinking and the lack of discipline around masks, social distancing, and cleaning, and things of that nature. So we are trying to get out of the red. And part of the thing I said in the press release was, if we can't have kids in the classroom, we can't be walking around the city of Lawrence like everything's okay. We can't be having big parties, and we can't be partying in restaurants so late. We are a red community, and we have to change that. It's a scarlet letter for the city, and so we are trying to change that, and that would help us in long term to get kids back in the classroom.
Great, thank you, Mayor. I didn't say this directly, just for the you all can hang out, CBI, but just thank you again for the information, for the presentation. Love to have you guys, present at future meetings, just, as the rule of the work rolls out. You can stay on, as much as you like, but just want to thank you. And, if you do want to go, I won't be offended.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So those were the items on the agenda. I just want to say, again, it's been a week, only a week since we last met, and we met the week before that. So we know that the district is working on just, the implementation plan for a variety of these areas. So I think what I'd like to do is, especially maybe at our next meeting, because you've had about a week or a little less than a week, I think there are going to be a lot of questions from board members around, just various aspects of the plan, from the teaching and learning to the parent engagement. How's that going? Like, how's the device distribution going? Things like that. I would probably unless there are things you want to say, Superintendent, at this time, my guess is that, with less than a week having passed since we last met, my guess is that a lot of those things are in motion, and then you're sort of putting it in motion. But I don't know if there's anything you want to say about any of those areas generally. But otherwise, I would expect that we, start diving deeper into them at our next meeting when you all have had a little more time to actually, get into more of the details.
That's right. We're in the thick of it and trying to implement the details of this to include this assessment, which is very pressing for us, and thinking through, our high needs students. And so we would be happy to come back to you in a couple weeks if that makes sense for you all. I'm not sure that between now and next Wednesday we have much more. As I mentioned, we are drafting and getting ready to collaborate with our partners at LTU for a staff survey. And at the same time, your request to be able to survey our families with respect to connectivity, devices, and food. Those are the things that we're working on right now, working very closely with the school-based leaders to help us ensure that when it does get out there, that all the families tend to it and actually respond. Otherwise, you know, we don't have complete data. And so that's where we are since we last spoke last Wednesday.
So again, thank you. And again, I'll summarize just to make sure I understand. So you're working on both the staff and those student surveys that we talked about. Those would be administered, or will be rather, and obviously that data will be used to continue to inform the plan and any decisions we need to make. So I appreciate that. Great. So those are the items on our agenda. Before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I will open it up to board members. Are there any other things that we just want to mention briefly before we adjourn? I'll start again going through. I'll start with Noemi.
I don't have any questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
I'm all set. The superintendent answered some of my questions. I wanted to ask about the family engagement with the technology and if we've made that one-to-one connection with the families. So
Right.
I'll wait for her report.
Great, thank you. Mayor?
I'm all set.
Great, and the chair is also all set. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so because we are remote, we do roll call votes. So Noemi?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
Mayor Rivera?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So thank you. We are now adjourned. Appreciate it.